take Alabama out of it, take Ohio State, take Clemson out of it. Find me the games that are most important. Find me the one game that you pinpoint on the college football schedule. It could be conference, could be non-conference, that's most important. So because I grew up in the South and you took Alabama and Clemson out of it, I went to Georgia, Florida. You could say LSU, Auburn. That's a big one. I mean, all these teams are going to be in the national conversation, but I decided to go outside of the South for the answer. There's a game that's tentatively scheduled to be played in Lambeau Field this year. Notre Dame's playing like half a dozen neutral site games this year. And one of them is against Wisconsin. These teams haven't played for a long, long time, and they're going to, again, according to schedule, play, I believe it's October 3rd. It's like week 4, week 5. They're going to play against Wisconsin, or the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, in Lambeau Field, in Green Bay. Now, this one will be awesome to be at, and this one has awesome ramifications for the national championship, at the very least, the playoff picture. I think that Notre Dame's college football playoff chances are on the line that day. If you've looked at the Irish schedule, I meant to bring a magazine out here, but I didn't. But if you look at their schedule, there are two, I think, glaring hurdles that jump out to the casual fan. The first is the one we're talking about right now. You know, they went to Georgia last year, and that was the big one everyone was talking about. This is where Notre Dame's going to get to measure themselves against the best of the best. Well, this year, there are two of them. One is against Wisconsin. I think people probably look at that matchup and they say, matchup-wise, Notre Dame probably fits this challenge pretty well. And then you've got Clemson coming up, and they come into South Bend later in the season. But I think Notre Dame matches up pretty well in this game, but there's no margin for error, and Notre Dame knows it going into this game because, as we said, they've got a date against Clemson. You can lose to Clemson and still be squarely in the mix for the college football playoff. But you lose to Wisconsin, you give yourself no margin for error. And also, if we see a Notre Dame team lose to Wisconsin, Wisconsin's a very solid team. I'm going to get to them in a second. But if they can't answer that challenge, what is the likelihood that they'll be equipped to answer the challenge of Clemson later? Now, Wisconsin's schedule, extremely interesting. Here's where this game falls. They play Notre Dame the week after they go to Michigan. So it's very exciting just within the context of Badger football to A, ask who's going to be playing quarterback. That's for our Badger fans. And B, for our national college football fans, you could just ask yourself, what Wisconsin team? Like, what are we looking at? Who are they when they come in here? You got two possibilities. Either they are flying sky high, probably undefeated, coming off a win at Michigan, in which case everyone's all of a sudden put them on their national radar if they weren't already, and it's time to validate that sentiment against Notre Dame, or they've lost against Michigan, in which case we find them, as our pal J.C. Sherbert so aptly puts it, in wounded animal mode. Either way, it's really fun to watch. Quarterback situation I mentioned just a second ago, that's a fun little follow-up. If you are in the National Preview Magazine crowd, if you're in the Scan the Team Previews crowd and you don't really dive in, and I don't blame you, you got a life to live, but if you're not a diehard Wisconsin fan, you know, if you're an Arkansas football fan, you probably don't know a whole lot about Wisconsin right now, unless you've made it a point to learn about them. But you do know one thing. You know they've had a quarterback there for about 15 years named Jack Cohn. Pause button. Who I erroneously referred to, has come to my attention, as Jack Doan. Colin, I didn't tell you this. I referred to this kid, no lie, as Jack Doan for an entire segment recently. And Jack Doan is a former pro wrestling referee, like circa late 90s WWF. And so I called that kid Jack Doan. I don't think it's a slight because Jack Doan was very good at his job. But this is not Jack Doan. Doesn't even look like him. This is Jack Cohn. Jack Cohn is, press play again, Jack Cohn is the Wisconsin quarterback. And if you're of the national variety as a fan, that's pretty much what you know about the Wisconsin quarterback situation. But if you zoom in on it a little bit, there's a kid who has been there a couple of years now, Graham Mertz. And he is nothing more than a name on a depth chart if you don't know about this program. But if you do know about this program, oh boy, there are some rumblings. There are some very loud whispers. Think about the loudest anyone's ever whispered anything to you. And that is how Wisconsin folks are talking to each other about this kid's potential. And here's basically the 10-second synopsis. We like Jack Cohn and Jack Doan. We like both of them, but we really like Jack Cohn. But we think we've seen our ceiling with him. And if our goal here, this is going to go longer than 10 seconds. If our goal here is to go further than just being a nice little Big Ten team, then we need a dynamic presence at quarterback. And while we don't definitively know what we could get with Graham Mertz, we think his upside is better. I say all that to say this. He's probably not starting week 1, but by the time we get to this October 3rd date against Notre Dame, who's at quarterback? Is Paul Chryst using both guys? Just a little something to think about there. But if Wisconsin exits this game with a win, and if they're undefeated, if they come out of this game undefeated, let me read you their remaining schedule. You tell me where the big remaining hurdle is. They've got, I can't even read that. I think I wrote Minnesota, at Maryland, Illinois, at Northwestern. Anything yet? No. At Purdue, Nebraska, at Iowa. What I'm telling you is, if they come out of this game with a win, they're favored the rest of the way. There are a couple of different playoff scenarios. There are a couple of different paths. Obviously, they could run the table. They could win the conference. They could drop a game, win the conference, they're in. So win the conference, you're going to be in. But then all of a sudden, if Wisconsin exits this game, let me tell you why it's so big. If they win that game, it boosts their resume mightily. And if they exit that one with a win and they're undefeated, then you start asking yourself as the weeks go by and the playoff picture starts to emerge a little more, you start asking yourself, wait a second. Wisconsin's already proven itself a couple of times. Maybe they've beaten Michigan, maybe they've beaten Notre Dame, and it looks like they're going to go to the Big Ten title game. Maybe they play Ohio State or Penn State. If they play that team close, and the playoff picture is muddier than we thought it would be, you got Paul Chryst and company sitting there, and maybe they don't take home the conference championship, but maybe they fight like heck in the conference championship game. There's a path where a one-loss non-conference champion, Wisconsin, is in the picture there. Just a number of different scenarios. But if Notre Dame wins that thing, different story. If Notre Dame wins that and they're still undefeated, then we get about a month, I think it's 4 weeks later, after this game against Wisconsin, where we start thinking about Clemson's probably biggest test of the year. It's an out-of-conference game on the road at Notre Dame. And we start asking ourselves, could it happen? Could it? Is the team speed there? That's always the question about Notre Dame. Team speed when they go up against Georgia or they go up against Alabama or Clemson in this case. Team speed. Yeah, we saw it before, and you can argue it was a misleading final score the last time those two teams played all you want to, and I would agree with you. But the bottom line is the final was what it was. So Notre Dame versus Wisconsin. Now, I know before I read my comment section, because I know my audience fairly well, a lot of you are going to scream, what about Texas at LSU? That's valid, very valid. That's a game I plan on being at, hopefully. We're going to talk about LSU in just a second. That one you could easily go with. I just chose to go that direction. I mean, I know we excluded Ohio State from this for argument's sake, but you know, Ohio State goes to Oregon in week 2. If Oregon were to clear that hurdle, how about that? Just some things to think about. That week 2, by the way, go look at week 2. There's some off-the-radar games. You know, there are some games that really could have a major national impact. I'll show you. I'll prove it right now, that you don't even know about, unless you've looked at a helmet schedule, unless you've just been waking up every morning and studying the helmet grid schedule. You know in week 2, Texas plays LSU. You probably know Ohio State goes to Oregon. Like, there are some big-time games, but there's a random game, probably in your eyes, unless you're a fan of one of these programs, in Atlanta in week 2. And it's Auburn versus North Carolina. Both of those programs fancy themselves as outside college football playoff contenders. Both of those programs fancy themselves as conference championship contenders. Is anyone even talking about that game? No. So it's not a conference game, mind you, but a measuring stick, absolutely it is.